The strategic ballet of medieval warfare. In medieval Europe's smoky shadows, battles were not the thunderous spectacles Hollywood adores, but quiet whispers of strategy and survival. Lords pondered their next move in dim halls, favoring words or stone walls over clashing swords. In a world where a single misstep could unravel a dynasty, outright war was a gamble few were eager to take. Knights, standing in plate armor that glinted dully under overcast skies, were more human fortresses than doomed heroes. Today we will unspool the myths, feel the ground beneath us, and hear the true heartbeat of medieval warfare. Step with me into the flickering shadows of medieval history, where warfare's truths unravel far from Hollywood's epic clashes. Instead of endless battlefield charges, true medieval warfare unfolded as a strategic ballet, elusive, rare, and steeped in caution. It was a world where battles were the ultimate gamble, a last-ditch effort capable of toppling dynasties and unraveling nations in an instant. Here, prudent lords preferred the intrigue of negotiation, deception, and alliance over the chaos of combat. Wars involved much more than brute force. Politics and treachery often decided outcomes, with lords navigating these perilous waters like seasoned chess masters. In an era where kingdoms teetered on a razor's edge, each potential battle carried a daunting cost, not just in blood, but also in gold and resources. The weight of logistics and societal impact. Organizing an army required far more than fiery speeches. It necessitated a fortune's worth of coin to arm, feed, and move troops. The prospect of battle was an undertaking of monumental scale, one far removed from the petty disputes often dramatized on screen. Socially, warfare's ripples disturbed livelihoods and trade across entire regions, the consequences extending beyond armies to affect civilians and economies. Often, the logistics of initiating a battle tipped decisions toward more peaceful resolutions. Alliances and marriages mediated by wealth instead of weapons emerge as vital diplomatic tools, serving as a testament to economic prudence and human concern. Such choices preserved not only lives but also societal fabric. Sieges, the dominant form of conflict. The arenas of council chambers buzzed with silent struggles that shaped power with as much intensity as the fields where knights clashed. When force became the last resort, the medieval battlefield favored sieges over open confrontations. Strongholds with their imposing stone walls offered safety amidst chaos, keeping enemies at bay with fortifications that demanded patience and strategy to conquer. Siege warfare embodied the calculated cold wars of attrition and starvation. For rulers, sieges were intricate chess games, where patience was the deadliest weapon. Siege engines and blockades tightened like a noose, gradually squeezing life from besieged lands until surrender replaced valor. Behind the gray stones, tales of endurance played out. Less dramatic, perhaps, but often more haunting. The calculated risk of open battle. The decision to step onto an open battlefield was akin to casting one's fate into the winds. Wars posed existential risks, as a single lost battle could recast a dynasty's fortune. In this delicate tapestry, alliances shifted with the tide, and experienced rulers trod carefully, aware that each engagement held incomprehensible stakes. The volatility of battle made them a last resort, with history littered with rulers whose reigns crumbled after defeat. Yet the possibility of triumph frequently lured leaders to conceive grand strategies for fleeting glory, with outcomes shaping destinies in intricate ways. The power of deception and diplomacy. These desperate gambles hinged on the uncertain axes of fate and circumstance. Away from the battlefield's clamor, strategy unfolded in the shadow realms of deception and diplomacy. Medieval leaders often relied on cunning over confrontation, with spies, messengers, and clandestine agreements sketching power's boundaries. These silent architects wielded influence as much as any warrior, crafting outcomes through words and whispers. Invisible networks of informants and diplomats orchestrated events and steered fates without unsheathing swords. Deception and alliance building were refined arts that demanded the same acumen and finesse as battlefield victories. Narratives as weapons, the role of propaganda. Moreover, wars weren't fought merely with weapons, but also through the craftsmanship of narratives. The power of propaganda swayed hearts and minds, presenting noble causes and rallying forces through belief and allegiance. Kings and lords wielded words as weapons, shaping perceptions to galvanize armies. Through crafted myths of heroism and divine favor, leaders ensured cohesion and morale, with these narratives leaving marks on history beyond the reach of steel. Terrain played a decisive role when battle was inevitable. Commanders versed in warfare knew that hills, rivers, and forests shaped outcomes more definitively than might. Landscapes carved paths to victory, offering shelter or peril in equal measure. Controlling terrain gave armies intimate knowledge and foresight, enabling triumph over superior numbers. Nature's impartiality. Nature's impartiality often decided battles through mud thicket or riverbanks, a constant reminder of humanity's intricate dance with the environment beyond the immediate clangor of sword and sinew. Warfare radiated wide, touching lives far from the front lines. From trade disruptions to shifting alliances, wars reached deep into communities, affecting everyone from musicians and craftsmen to farmers. Society's currents, swayed by forgotten skirmishes, left marks more indelible than any battle scar. These societal ripples told tales of triumph and loss, as conquests and defeats forged changes, shaping daily life. Ironically, dodging the clamor of battles sometimes culminated in peaceful resolutions, preserving status quo without a single sword drawn. The wisdom of peaceful resolutions. Diplomatic skill offered respite from the shadow of war, safeguarding treasures both tangible and intangible. Through peaceful negotiations, medieval rulers often halted wars before they ignited, ensuring that futures remained untouched by havoc. The avoidance of open conflict spun tales of resilience and subtle victories, painting a testament to the pragmatic wisdom of those medieval souls who realized that the rare battle left untold stories waiting beneath history's surface. Picture the knight of popular imagination, a gallant figure, banner streaming, galloping headlong into a melee of clashing swords. It's a vivid image, but one that owes more to romantic tales than the gritty realities of medieval warfare. The knight's reality: strategy over recklessness. The life of a knight was a constant juggle of strategy, survival, and the rigorous demands of warfare. Knights were not the reckless charges of Hollywood, but rather elite warriors honed from a young age in combat, strategy, and horsemanship. They treasured life and limb and their expensive horses as precious investments not to be squandered on foolish charges. The stakes in battle were high. Charging blindly could spell doom for a knight's life and status. After all, a knight's identity was deeply entwined with his social standing and property. Horses, prized assets, were not only rare, but consumed significant resources for their upkeep. Thus, this storied image of the chivalrous, fearless warrior cloaked in glory was often more an exercise in restraint, opting for tactical withdrawal and regrouping rather than suicidal valor. Skirmishing, the knight's craft. Hollywood might have you believe otherwise, but in truth, knights were master strategists, often using skirmishing techniques to whittle down opponents instead of throwing themselves into ranks of spears. Skirmishing was a knight's craft, a sophisticated dance of agile, quick strikes calculated to confuse and weaken the enemy. Unlike the grand cavalry charges seen in films, these smaller confrontations allowed knights to conserve energy, gather intelligence, and exploit enemy vulnerabilities without pouring all their resources into high-stakes gambles. Skirmishes were less about bravado and more about brains, offering the knights ways to inflict damage from a safe distance. Terrain as a strategic ally. Terrain was a knight's silent partner. Dense forests, hills, and narrow defiles turned into strategic allies, negating the numerical advantage of adversaries. It was an intricate ballet of feigned retreats, drawing foes onto uneven grounds where they could be tackled piecemeal. If knights skirmished, it wasn't simply out of cowardice, but because charging was costly. Imagine the scene. Horses resplendent in armor, knights gleaming like human tanks. This spectacle came at incredible expense. The gear, armor, weapons, and the warhorse itself were the sort of burden that could financially bruise, if not break, an entire noble line. Engaging in a reckless charge without assured success was tantamount to throwing away a prize fortune. The economic cost of chivalry. The economic ramifications were profound. A fallen knight and steed weren't just casualties, but crippling losses, necessitating the training of new squires, crafting or purchasing equipment, and acquiring new mounts. Thus, what could have been perceived as mere military movements were in truth careers loaded with calculations, weighing gain against potential ruin. Yet the cavalry charge wasn't just a last-ditch measure. It played a significant psychological role in battle as well. At times, the shock of a thunderous charge could find gaps in enemy morale, turning a skirmish into a panicked rout. This required perfect timing and saw seasoned commanders waiting for subtle signs. An exposed flank, a hint of disorder, a flicker of retreat. The psychological impact of the charge. When knights did charge, it often followed strategic maneuvers, feints, and sustained pressure to undermine the enemy's defenses, exploiting their moments of weakness for decisive impact. In the heat of battle, a charge was not merely a display of raw power, but a psychological tool designed to tip the scales through intimidation and momentum. The success of any charge hinged on coordination, a military ballet requiring knights to move in unified precision. Unlike chaotic depictions in cinema, where knights sweep forward as a pandemonium of chaos, real-life charges demanded tight formations and controlled execution. Success born from these charges relied on training, communication, and shared purpose. Collective strength over individual heroism, with heraldry and signals guiding them through battle. Deviation risked disorder, exposing valiant knights to enemy retaliation. Within these disciplined formations, it was less about individual heroism and more about collective strength, a harmony of rhythm, timing, and leadership underpinning the clash. Knights, however, found victory in alternatives to charging. The battlefield was as much about mindset as it was about muscle. The possibility of a charge often worked as a deterrent, forcing the enemy to reassess, retreat, or negotiate. Knights played the game of perceptions, cunning and feigned withdrawals and psychological warfare, heralding through a show of strength that serious conflict wasn't worth the risk. Illusion and misdirection. The power of illusion and misdirection often triumphed over sheer aggression, leaving enemies snared and off balance. Yet sometimes circumstances called for the desperation of a full cavalry charge, precisely when defeat loomed. It was in these crucibles of intense peril where knights, driven by necessity rather than choice, embodied the dramatic turns of battle often romanticized in stories. In these climactic moments, charges held the potential to transform imminent defeat into victory, propelled by surprise and urgency. Even amidst peril, knightly charges were spectacles of grit and bravado, a curtain call on the stage of medieval warfare, where fate and valor shared the limelight. Terrain's influence on cavalry. In navigating terrain, knights examined their theaters of war with a meticulous eye. Land was their ally or their nemesis, its features influencing strategies. Hills, forests, and marshes could amplify their force or thwart their movements, with the landscape dictating when and where they would gamble their charge. An awareness of slope, obstacles, and natural terrain features informed knights, offering advantageous grounds for unleashing their cavalry assault or cautioning them against rash advances into treacherous domains. As strategic thinkers, they knew the land was as vital as their weaponry, with each stage of their charge modulated by the intricacies of nature's blueprint, revealing a different story than the one told by myths of unrestrained heroism and glory. The evolution of armor. In the medieval tapestry of conflict, armor stood as a silent sentinel, a testament to human ingenuity that evolved alongside the relentless march of warfare. Imagine, if you will, wandering through a bustling medieval market. You'd find early knights wrapped in the metallic embrace of chainmail, a shimmering river of interlinked rings. This flexible yet sturdy mesh offered reasonable protection, though it soon revealed its own vulnerabilities as swords grew longer and crossbows deadlier. The response, like nature itself, was evolution. Armorers embarked on the demanding journey of crafting plate armor, sheets of gleaming metal molded to the wearer's physique. Plate armor, a marvel of engineering. Much more than a simple upgrade, this leap signified a web of resources, craft, and wealth, marking not just the wearer's martial prowess, but their social pedigree. Hollywood indulges in depicting knights as lumbering giants in their armor, clattering clunkily across the battlefield. In reality, these suits were marvels of engineering, balancing protection with an unexpected degree of mobility. Crafted to fit like a second skin, the armor boasted articulated joints that turned knights into graceful warriors capable of wielding weapons, riding into the fray, and yes, even performing acrobatics with surprising ease. Mobility and protection. The approximately 45 to 66 lb of metal was a harmonious blend of design, a deterrent to fatigue, and an enabler of agile combat, though some weight concerns lingered during prolonged engagements. In the swirl of combat, stories of a flaw in the armor persist, a mythical vulnerability exploited with a hero's precision. The truth is more richly textured. Armor did indeed have gaps at the joints for mobility, but these were guarded by ingenious cover plates and demanded exceptional skill to penetrate. Medieval combat manuals reveal this with their detailed instructions on biomechanics, suggesting not brute force, but tactical finesse. Specialized weapons like maces and hammers emerged, designed not to find a non-existent gap, but to deliver bone-rattling force capable of stunning an opponent. The psychological impact of armor. The psychological clout of plate armor loomed just as large as its physical protection. Picture knights, towering and implacable, glinting ominously under pale sunlight. An army clad in such spectacle was a harbinger of dread, intimidating foes and often deciding battles before a single blow was struck. Plates of polished steel didn't just deflect swords, they sowed fear, a primal weapon that could end an engagement with as much certainty as steel or blood. Crafting such armor was a dance of art and science, an endeavor that wove metallurgy with the sculpting precision of craftsmen. Armorers, artisans in their own right, would labor meticulously over sheets of metal, each swing of the hammer a note in the symphony of defense and design. Artistry and expense. Craftsmanship didn't neglect aesthetics. Suits were often adorned with family emblems through etching and embossing, adding layers of storytelling to the canvas of war. These creations didn't merely drape over knights. They reflected tales of lineage and identity back to society. And like art, armor took time, sometimes weeks, often months, to perfect, revealing its staggering costs in the privilege of those who bore it. Yet even fortresses have weaknesses. The plate armor, while formidable, wasn't infallible. Extended wear could lead to fatigue, and under glaring sun, the metal cocoon became a furnace, risking heat stroke for its occupant. The decline of armor. As battles morphed with emerging technologies, armor had to adapt or face obsolescence. Crossbows with penetrating might and the thunderous dawn of gunpowder arms put armor to a punishing test, igniting an arms race of innovation that stretched into history's bowels. Owning and maintaining armor was a laborious ritual, a hidden cost of medieval war. Knights, ever vigilant, tasked squires with the painstaking care of cleaning and repairing their steel skin, understanding that rust was an uninvited enemy. Beyond care, logistics loomed. Armor required thoughtful transport to battle, its donning a ceremony that demanded time and strategy. As the medieval years waned, so too did the dominance of plate armor with the booming rise of gunpowder. Its decline wasn't just a shift in fashion, it mirrored an evolution in the very fabric of warfare. The battlefield, once the purview of knights, open to tactics and skill, echoing societal transformations beyond the clang of combat. Despite its waning use, the silhouette of armor endured, etched into cultural memory as an emblem of chivalry and heroism, a gleaming ghost of an age where the line between life and death seemed starkly defined by a suit of shining plate. The reality of medieval sword fights. The notion of sword fights as elegant, choreographed dances belongs to the realm of myth, a fantasy largely spun by Hollywood's vibrant imagination. In truth, medieval combat was a vicious, unpredictable affair, wrapped in chaos and often over in a few brutal seconds. A single misstep could mean your last breath. Fighters did not indulge in drawn-out duels of decorum and flair. They fought for survival. Necessity, not artistry, shaped their techniques. Imagine knights locked in harrowing close quarters, not sparring partners, but survivalists using whatever means to prevail. Grappling, tripping, even headbutting were fair game. Beyond the blade, other weapons. The pommel or guard of a sword could turn into a bludgeoning device in an instant. This fight-or-die reality reflects in medieval manuals from masters like Johannes Lichtenauer and Fiore de Liberi, who taught not the beauty of fencing, but the brute effectiveness of staying alive. Men on the battlefield wielded more than just swords. Knights bore maces, hammers, and axes, all crafted to pierce or crush armor. These tools, less precise than swords, delivered the raw force needed to disable armored foes quickly. Remember, warfare didn't grant second chances. Infantrymen, often underestimated in tales, bore essential weapons like spears or polearms, opposing mounted knights with reach and leverage. Grappling, the hidden art. The sword, symbolic of knightly valor, was just one tool among many in a fighter's repertoire. The pragmatism of ancient combat lay not in noble swordplay, but in the heat of desperation, exploiting any and every vulnerability. Grappling was the hidden art, often turning the tide in a sword fight. While the sword held symbolic sway, knights knew well the dance of grapple and clinch. In the noisy chaos of battle, toppling your opponent could spell victory or doom. Manuals like Flos Duellatorum highlight this, delving into joint locks and throws to neutralize foes. The battlefield, muddied and perilous, often revealed who could turn chaos into opportunity. Armor's influence on combat. Armor played a pivotal role, shaping sword fights with its very presence. Unlike the easily rent tunics of cinematic knights, the true armor, chainmail or plate, deflected blows with stoic efficiency. This pushed warriors to adapt, targeting gaps in armor with thrust rather than wild slashes. Medieval fighters had to exploit openings in the armor under the armpits, neck and joints to land effective strikes. Training honed their reflexes, turning the chaotic clash of sword fighting into a mental game of anticipation and deception. Kill shots weren't about sheer luck. They demanded precision, patience, and sharp wits, elevating combat to an unforeseen duel of nerves. Psychological warfare and duels. The seasoned warrior discerned weakness with a trained eye, using feints and counters to mislead before striking decisively. Far from the Hollywood myth of untamed aggression, medieval combat was an intimate, strategic engagement. Psychological warfare was a fundamental, if understated, part of these encounters. Combatants knew the power of perception, whether feigned confidence or visible fear could influence an opponent. Taunts and aggressive stances became weapons as lethal as blades. These mental games were about sowing doubt and bolstering morale. Chroniclers noted the psychological toll as the rush of battle often pitched fighters against inner demons. Self-doubt, fatigue, fear. These inner skirmishes mirrored the physical, illustrating the intense human stakes of survival where tales often sanitize. Training and experience. Behind the myth, training and experience tipped battles. Young nobles training for knighthood endured years of rigorous conditioning, learning footwork, weapon mastery, and horseback skills. Victory stemmed not from lineage, but from the seasoned application of practiced skill over countless hours. Veterans carried an unseen instinct shaped by survival and seasoned by scars born of futility and fortune. The unspoken tutors on the field. Battles relied on intuition, skill honed through relentless drills, and the unrecorded tales shared among survivors. Manuals passed down the knowledge of warriors as enduring tomes of martial tradition, bridging theory and practice. Compilations like Flos Duellatorum and Fechtbuch provided exhaustive instruction, offering structure to what outsiders may see as chaotic brawls. Chivalry versus survival. Within these texts, the implications of strategic thinking, discipline, and honor are stitched into every flip of the page, illustrating a craft not merely savage, but esteemed and evolving. Discussions of chivalry and honor provided the cultural backdrop of sword fights. Knights considered reputation dearly, guiding their conduct. Yet when steel met flesh, survival instincts overshadowed noble precepts. Chivalry might have been lauded in tales, held less sway in the fray, though its veneer colored the narratives post-battle. The facade of noble valor splintered against the immediacy of grim survival, transforming actions into whispered legends. The genuine struggle. Reflecting on these truths reveals a world more complex and raw than movies suggest. Sword fighting captured a genuine struggle unedited by fiction, resonating through the annals of history and within the walls of crumbling keeps. In embracing this narrative, we traverse past elegance to embrace the tangled reality of medieval combat, inviting the audience to glimpse the genuine, raw humanity penned within dust-laden manuscripts and worn armorial engravings. Picture a medieval battlefield. Not the cinematic chaos we often see, but a scene where peasant soldiers stand with backs straight and resolve firm. In the flicker of reality's firelight, these men were far more than mere cannon fodder. The strength of peasant soldiers. Contrary to Hollywood's portrayal, medieval peasants weren't hapless lambs led to slaughter by noble knights. Indeed, the idea of peasants bumbling into battles without hope misunderstands their reality. These ordinary folk, through their daily toil and terrain familiarity, possessed the grit and skill to surprise their foes. Peasants were not strangers to labor. They were hunters, craftsmen, and farmers whose daily tools easily became weapons of war. Bows, spears, and even pitchforks became instruments of both survival and combat. This everyday expertise provided them with significant strategic advantages. Organized militias. It was not uncommon for rural towns to conscript men into service, part of a world woven together with feudal obligations and communal ties. Training ranged from basic drills to more disciplined formations, allowing these levies to stand as formidable forces within larger armies. Take the Battle of Courtrai in 1302 as a shining testament to the power of organized peasant militias. Here in the lowlands of Flanders, an army of weavers and artisans met and ultimately defeated an elite French force. Their success was no fluke, but rather a masterpiece of strategic cunning. The Flemish militiamen dug trenches and used the land they knew well, to break the charge of mounted knights. Cleverness over flash. It wasn't flashy swordplay or gallant charges that won the day, but rather discipline, unity, and cleverness. This victory echoed across Europe, a clarion call that undermined the untouchable status of the noble cavalry. The longbow is another tale worth telling. While knights in armor prided themselves on dramatic bruising charges, peasants armed with these formidable bows could rain death from afar. The English victories at battles like Crécy and Agincourt were owed to such archers who trained from youth to draw these powerful weapons. With arrows that found weak points in armor and in spirit, an ordinary longbowman could fell the mightiest armored foe. Infantry formations. Meanwhile, standing shoulder to shoulder, spear in hand, peasants formed phalanxes and shield walls that turned cavalry charges into feudal gestures. Yet it wasn't just weaponry that made peasant forces noteworthy. Discipline and structure were the backbone of their strength, much like the roots binding the soil. Medieval peasants, molded by a communal existence, translated this cohesiveness to warfare. They followed leaders, adhered to plans, and worked in unison. A far cry from the chaotic hordes often seen on screen. Swiss companies, renowned for their precise formations, illustrate how discipline and unity transform peasant soldiers into formidable opponents. Terrain mastery. The landscape was often the great equalizer in battles. With their intimate knowledge of the land, peasants mastered the art of terrain warfare. Hills, forests, and streams became the allies of those who planted fields and knew where every rock lay hidden underfoot. These farmers-turned-fighters could turn a wooded path into a corridor of death, bottling up knights who relied on open ground to maneuver. Many battles were won not just by strength or weapons, but by a clever choice of battlefield. Beyond all else, numbers played their part. A swell of humanity drawn from village life could overwhelm a smaller force of knights through sheer presence. The power of multitude. Military leaders used the weight of the populace as leverage, turning these unyielding figures from mere bodies into strategic assets. The true effectiveness of peasant levies lay in this multitude, a human tide that could turn the tide of battle. Leadership was indispensable. Each army needed a figurehead, someone to rally spirits and guide the masses. From the ranks of Montrose, Radagaisus, and lesser-known names, leaders emerged to give voice to grievances and formidability to resolve. Charismatic commanders transformed ranks through vision, keeping morale high with tales of justice, vengeance, or hope for a better future. Adaptability and support. A peasant in medieval times wore many hats. Farmer by day, soldier when the trumpet of war sounded. These individuals knew adaptability was survival. In battle, they provided logistical support, acting as quartermasters or engineers, knowing well that fighting wasn't just about the clashing of swords, but also about sustaining the effort. This versatility, nurtured by necessity, made them invaluable assets in ways that transcended mere numbers. Victories were sometimes forged not just in physical might, but in psychological resilience. The esprit de corps within a peasant army was fragile but potent. Songs and psalms bolstered their spirits, creating a shared identity which, when properly kindled, could become an undying flame of resistance. Through this blend of camaraderie and cause, they endured, even when faced with impossible odds. Revisiting history's tapestry. Ultimately, understanding these peasant soldiers invites us to revisit and revise the tapestry of history. They weren't mere pawns, but actors in their own right, rewriting stories on screen and off. Breaking stereotypes reveals the nuanced dynamic of medieval life, reshaping our perception of social hierarchies and the so-called helpless masses. When we listen closely, away from the din of battle and the yells of combat, we hear the true tale of resilience and resolve, the extraordinary courage and spirit of those who stood firm in the face of adversity. Sieges, the true theaters of war. In the grand narratives of Hollywood, castles often loom in the background as silent witnesses to epic battles. Yet in the gritty reality of medieval warfare, sieges were the real theaters of conflict. They were not swift clashes, but arduous endeavors testing endurance and wits on both sides. Castles, those stone giants of the landscape, stood not merely as symbols of power, but as bulwarks against invaders, reflecting the high stakes of survival. The strategies employed were simple yet brutally effective: starve the inhabitants into submission, relentlessly hammer their defenses, or skillfully negotiate their surrender. Preparation in siege machinery. Preparing for a siege was an undertaking that demanded extensive planning and resources. Attackers had to amass food, weapons, and men, all while crafting ingenious machinery to breach castle walls, trebuchets to hurl stones with terrifying force, siege towers to breach height advantages, and ram heads to batter down gates. Each siege told a story of innovation and adaptation against the ever-evolving architecture of castles. Defenders huddled within their stone confines, rationing dwindling supplies while praying for relief. Disease and malnourishment became regular bedfellows, driving some to madness in their hunger. Starvation emerged as a silent weapon, turning time into an ally for besiegers, cutting off supplies. The psychological toll of siege. They'd often watched from afar as food stocks dwindled within the castle, and desperation fractured the morale of those trapped inside. Stories whisper of families turning upon one another, hunger drawing out humanity's most primal and desperate instincts. But maintaining a siege was no picnic for those encamped outside either. They had to sustain their own lines and ensure no relief forces broke their blockade. Meanwhile, psychological warfare played its own relentless game, with rumors and gestures of intimidation penetrating the thickest walls. The mind became as potent a battlefield as the ground beneath shifting feet. Mining and counter-mining. While the sky saw stones, the earth beneath waged its own clandestine conflict. Sappers, the unsung heroes or villains, depending on which side you stood, of sieges, dug beneath the mighty towers, hoping to undermine the very foundations holding walls tall and proud. Danger lurked with every strike of their pickaxes, as defenders above listened intently for signs of treachery below, sending counterminers like spectral figures to confront this hidden threat. Life during siege warfare, both inside and outside the walls, was a tapestry woven with human resilience. Within, communities knitted closely through shared suffering, consuming anything that might fend off hunger a day longer. Endurance in daily life. Outside, besieging armies crafted makeshift homes, battling not just the defenders, but disease and the relentless monotony of camp life. Through it all, moments of levity emerged amidst the grim, with bards weaving tales or games played over the thin line separating leisure from madness. Siege engines, towering trebuchets, rolling siege towers, and formidable battering rams embodied the titans of this standstill combat. They roared with the explosive release of tension, launching devastation toward once imposing walls or trembling gates. Each blow landed was a testament to human ingenuity, driven by desperation to topple what seemed indomitable. Diplomacy and treachery. In this crucible of stand and wait, diplomacy and treachery often edge their way to the forefront, subtly tipping the scales. Diplomats under truce flags negotiated terms, promising safety to defenders weary of conflict. Yet just as often, deceit slithered through the cracks, spies smuggled within, traitors bribed to open gates, delicate webs in the hope of a bloodless victory. Hope wasn't left entirely to secret dealings, though for those trapped within castle walls, the arrival of relief forces was the dream gleaming through the fog of despair. These allies faced the daunting task of stealthily advancing, potential ambush at every bend, to disrupt the suffocating grip of the besiegers. The threat of relief forces. For the attacking army, the threat of such forces loomed large, pressing them to prepare for unexpected confrontations. The aftermath of a siege told its own poignant tale of triumph and heartbreak. For victors, the spoils of war awaited, but so too did the heavy reality of governance over new and often hostile lands. For those who defended and ultimately succumbed, defeat mingled with relief, a chapter closed in a narrative of survival. Lands lay scarred, communities scattered, yet life pressed on, crafting folklore from the ruins. Each tale told carrying whispers of resilience and strength, a microcosm of the era. Thus, siege warfare, in its drawn-out brutality, laid bare the medieval world's harsh realities. Through stone and starvation, strategy and subterfuge, hardly another facet of medieval struggle captured the relentless spirit of the time as sieges did. Each was a microcosm of the era's heart. Patience, cunning, and relentless will stretched across years, carving its stories into the very stones left standing. In the sweeping tales told by Hollywood, the spectacle of knights charging under fluttering banners captivates us, depicting it as the ultimate show of medieval bravery, the cinematic myth of the banner charge. These scenes fill our screens with the allure of adventure and heroism, knights galloping with swords drawn, flags boldly catching the wind. However, the gripping excitement woven into these depictions often obscures the harsh reality of medieval warfare. Historical records paint a picture less glorious and far more harrowing, where such daring acts were reckoned as reckless gambles rather than noble feats. Contrary to cinematic portrayals, rushing headlong into battle beneath a banner often translated to a journey into peril rather than a pathway to honor. The medieval battlefield demanded discipline and strategy. Any loss of formation could spell disaster. The importance of formation. Communication across the chaotic clamor of a medieval skirmish was limited. You couldn't rely on anything beyond the shout of your nearest comrade. Hence, soldiers were trained to move as one cohesive body, maintaining the integrity essential for both survival and success. Battlefields of the Middle Ages were stages on which unity and coordination reigned supreme, reducing the opportunity for lone acts of gallantry. The essence of medieval warfare lay in its structured formations. Soldiers fought in shield walls, tight-knit pike formations, and regiments of archers, crafting an unyielding force that was a nightmare for adversaries to crack. Discipline and structure. A shield wall, for example, was more than an arrangement of soldiers. It was a formidable barricade that not only thwarted enemy advances, but psychologically disheartened less organized foes. Unlike the chaotic charges so celebrated in folklore, a hurried, unrestrained assault could lead to unexpected chaos, leaving troops at the mercy of a disciplined counterattack. Commanders who mastered the art of maintaining order among their ranks were often those who triumphed, shaping their armies into single, formidable entities. History is strewn with tales of banner charges gone awry, cautionary tales written in blood. Cautionary tales from history. The Battle of Hattin in 1187 serves as a vivid reminder where crusaders, encumbered by mismanagement and thirst, fell into disarray. Their disorganized attempts to pierce Saladin's methodical lines only hastened their downfall. The crusaders, in their eagerness, became victims of their ambition, a stark testament to the consequences of mistaking visible bravery for effective strategy. Such instances in history consistently reveal the folly of relying on impromptu banner-driven charges, showing us how frequently reckless bravado was harshly punished by grim reality. Tactical intelligence over bravado. This divergence between the romanticized charge and practical warfare strategies underscores a key truth. Medieval combat was as much about tactical intelligence as it was about martial skill. True artistry on the battlefield was found in formation refinement. Armies maneuvered and clashed as units, employing complex strategies with training that rivaled the finest orchestras. Techniques like the schiltron, a defensive circle bristling with pikes, or the wedge, a pointed assault formation, illustrated the ingenious tactics of the era. It's a picture that contrasts sharply with imagined cavalry charges, which in reality involve precise, disciplined units rather than wild, unchecked stampedes. The power of discipline. The Knights of the Teutonic Order, skilled in forming wedges to breach enemy defenses, exemplified how discipline amplified their lethal efficacy, while behind them, archers focused their aim, all shielded by layers of strategic positioning. Discipline, a soldier's most valuable weapon besides sword or spear, was the backbone of effective medieval campaigns. Organized warfare required coordinated efforts, not acts of isolated heroism. Battles demanded training in both combat and restraint, where every knight's survival hinged on their capacity to adhere to orders without question. Training for chaos, trust in commanding figures, drilled into them through rigorous garrison life, prepared armies for the unpredictability of battle. Soldiers spent countless hours rehearsing formations, honing movements, and mimicking battlefield conditions to graft precision into their bones, ensuring their survival amidst chaos. The unity forged through such discipline ensured that medieval victories were often collective achievements rooted in coordinated efforts, not legends of solitary knights. The often ignored logistical backbone of medieval warfare underscores yet another strategic dimension: the burden of logistics. Behind the reality of battle lay the burden of supplies, provisions, medical care, equipment, demanding scrupulous planning and immediate adaptation during combat. The endeavor of mobilizing armies was a tale in itself, where slow-moving, burdened troops contended with the physical demands of armor and weaponry, an image far removed from the swiftness and agility glamorized by film. For knights and lords, honor was the currency of their time, its preservation as precarious as the balance of steel upon steel. Their reputations were staked not only on valor, but on wisdom and measured judgment. The cost of recklessness to reputation. Reckless acts could diminish a standing as decisively as any enemy weapon, not just risking immediate lives, but potentially unraveling important alliances, diminishing their authority, and inviting scrutiny or claims of incompetence. The stories of triumphs and failures taught lessons in maintaining reputations, where poised wisdom prevailed over the superficial temptation of vainglory. The medieval battlefield was as much a psychological arena as it was a physical one, where the persistent hum of fear wove through the ranks, mingling with the clatter of sword and shield. Every soldier, wielding personal and immediate fears, was aware of the fragility of courage under the shadow of death. Psychological warfare and morale. Commanders leveraged this psychological pulse, rallying troops with words and symbols, reinforcing morale as strongly as any fortified wall. The power of the collective spirit was a subtle weapon, with successful campaigns often balanced on sustaining this mental edge amidst battlefield horrors. In stepping back to assess these facets of medieval warfare, it becomes evident that beyond cinema's romantic filters lies a more profound tapestry. Beyond cinematic romance, Hollywood's fixation on dramatic visuals veils the intricate strategies and formidable discipline that define medieval combat. This exploration reveals an underlying truth. Beyond the myth lies a world where calculated wisdom and disciplined unity define battles. It is this blend of ancient insight and steadfast order, more than the bluster of cinematic battles, that continues to speak to the complex legacy of medieval warfare. In the theater of medieval warfare, the scene unfolds not only in the storm of clashing swords and the cries echoing across mud-spattered battlefields, but in the quiet, calculated exchanges that followed. Capture over killing. Here, the goal often leaned more towards capturing rather than killing, driven by a keen awareness of the economic incentives entwined with capturing high-value targets. Imagine the rustle of treaties and the murmur of deals being struck. For within these negotiations lay a paradoxical form of respect between enemies, reflecting a world where capturing a noble or high-born adversary often translated into substantial wealth through ransom. Picture knights on horseback, not merely warriors, but businessmen of sorts, their eyes searching beyond the chaos for opportunities. Ransom, an economic incentive. These captured nobles and knights were more than just prisoners. They were investment opportunities, worth their weight in gold once a suitable ransom was arranged. For many, the collection of a ransom was not just an act of mercy, but a crucial component of their economic survival, funding future campaigns or reinforcing their personal coffers. In a time when familial lands and fortune were as precarious as a balance on a sword's edge, capturing enemies transformed into a pragmatic pursuit. So deeply woven into the culture was the concept of ransom that it held a place within treaties and was shaped by the clergy's influence, embedding it further into the fabric of feudal society. The chivalric code and capture. Against this backdrop, the chivalric code emerges, a tapestry of valor and honor, where knights subscribed to a set of ideals dictating noble conduct in warfare. Here was a world where pragmatic concerns and romanticized ideals blended seamlessly, where capturing a fellow noble reflected not just economic savvy, but adherence to societal values that favored respect and dignity. In the art of war, the noble code prompted knights to treat their esteemed adversaries with a degree of respect, turning battlefield captures into a complex dance between warfare's brutal reality and the societal norms of the age. Managing high-status captives. Yet in this dance of battle, managing one's temporary charges became crucial. Once captured, these prisoners, especially those from high status, required guarding and careful handling, a task as strategic as any maneuver on the battlefield. Between the clinking of chains and the shuffle of armored feet came the responsibilities of feeding, housing, and transporting captives to safer grounds, all while ensuring hefty ransoms could be negotiated without risk of escape. Their custodian's goal wasn't simply containment, but the artful management of prisoners, as it was a delicate business requiring a fighter's might and a diplomat's tact. Heralds and negotiators. Adding to this delicate balance of violence and diplomacy were the heralds and negotiators, unsung players in the theater of war. With the battle's dust still settling, these figures strode into the fray with roles to calm the chaos. Heralds, impartial and trusted, conveying messages, negotiating paroles, and ensuring structured surrender terms. Their neutrality brought order after the storm, ensuring ransom processes could proceed as a dignified tradition amidst the disorderly clash of arms. Financial lifeline for knights. For knights, economic survival sometimes depended heavily upon these outcomes, where a single successful capture could alleviate the financial strain of maintaining their martial way of life. Armored as they were, these men required not just skill in battle, but an eye for opportunity, always alert to the chance of a lucrative capture, one that might balance the expenses of horses, armor, and the endless quest for honor. As feudal economies wandered far from the cash-dominant systems of modernity, the capture and ransom of a noble opponent could be a knight's financial lifeline, offering a rare windfall amidst the uncertainties of medieval life. The fate of commoners. However, for the common soldier or civilian, capture spelled a more ominous fate. These were not figures poised for ransom, but for exploitation, bound to serve in fields, fortify castles, or labor at the whims of their captors. Such grim prospects cast shadows over the battlefield, reminding one of the rigid class distinctions that defined medieval society and heightening the unrest that simmered beneath feudal peace. Captivity's potential wasn't limited to immediate gain. It was a tool in the great game of medieval politics. Captives as bargaining chips. High-status captives carried weight beyond their ransom price, serving as bargaining chips in treaties, marriage alliances, and other intricate negotiations. Captors strategized over the long-term benefits, ensuring that the presence of illustrious prisoners whispered promises of shifted power dynamics and renewed alliances. Yet within this elaborate web, honor still held sway. Knights captured on the battlefield were sometimes released on parole, not to run free, but to act under their sworn word until a ransom was negotiated, playing into a chivalric ideal where a promise bore as much weight as a chain. The trust system. It was a system of trust that worked surprisingly well, revealing the strong cultural emphasis on reputation and integrity during the period. Finally, the practice of taking hostages extended the reach of medieval diplomacy, where young nobles often lived in foreign courts for their family's allegiance. These hostages were not just symbols of compliance, but instruments of peace, their presence urging families to honor treaties in exchange for the lives and safety of their loved ones. Echoes of these practices ripple into modern understanding, reminding us of the timeless interplay of violence and diplomacy within the human condition. These powdered remnants from medieval struggles leave faint trails in today's complex international negotiations, where again the players in the game must weigh economic, political, and moral considerations. A legacy spun across the fire-lit tales of history, nature, ally or adversary. Amid the tumult of medieval warfare, nature often emerged as an unpredictable ally or adversary, capable of altering the course of battle with the flick of a cloud or the rush of a river. Unlike the cinematic splendor of neatly organized battlefields, true medieval conflicts were waged on chaotic, uneven terrain, brimming with natural obstacles. Commanders grappled not just with enemy troops, but with the land itself. Fields transformed into muddy quagmires by relentless rain, dense forests harbored ambushes unseen, and hills provided critical vantage points. Far from being mere backdrops, these terrains often determined victors before the first sword was swung. Rain's impact. Rainstorms could level the field, turning ground to muck and robbing heavily armored knights of their power. The Battle of Agincourt in 1415 serves as a vivid reminder. As French knights charged, the quagmire swallowed their mighty horses, rendering them vulnerable to the unburdened English archers. The soil seemed to take sides, transforming into a sly accomplice that tipped the scales in favor of those agile enough to adapt. Armies had to rethink strategy under these muddy conditions. A commander's insight into weather was crucial. It became clear that maps and weaponry were not the sole determinants of battle. Rather, the very ground underfoot commanded as much respect and fear. The mystery of forests. Forests, too, carried their own mysterious authority, offering not solace but potential peril. These dense thickets offered concealment for guerrilla tactics in ambushes that larger forces rarely anticipated. The tangle of trees served as natural fortifications, disrupting formations and creating chaos among disciplined soldiers. This was exemplified by the earlier Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, where Germanic tribes obliterated Roman legions using woodland cover. Such ghostly surroundings mirrored a time when battles relied more on the cunning of those familiar with the shadowy paths of their native forests than on sheer might. Navigating wooded domains. Navigating these wooded domains required a sharp ear and even sharper wit, with strategies forged in silence, a departure from Hollywood's grandiose charges. Rivers stood as barriers, majestic and formidable, often dictating the course of conflicts. These natural dividers were both fortifications and hazards, their command of land as effective as any man-made wall. Crossing them under hostile circumstances demanded dexterity and strategic cunning. The Battle of Stirling Bridge highlighted this when Scottish forces leveraged the bridge's narrowness to trap an invading English army. River crossings. Navigating these treacherous crossings required commanders to outthink the elements, turning nature's potential hindrances into tactical advantages. The greatest battles along rivers were those where human ingenuity bent to nature's law, finding victory not in numbers, but in reading the serene waters beneath. High ground offered its distinct dominance, allowing those with oversight to wield a potent advantage with arrows and stones. Castles perched on heights transformed into daunting fortresses, demanding both strength and strategy from would-be conquerors. The Battle of Stirling Bridge serves again as a testament, where Scottish forces harnessed their knowledge of the terrain to overcome a larger foe. The advantage of high ground. Command of the high ground was not merely about physical positioning, but a psychological gain, casting a shadow over those below. It echoed a truth as old as war itself. Mastery of the hills translated to mastery of the battlefield's very soul. Weather, that silent equalizer, often played its hand with an inscrutable smile. Rain marooned marchers, storms dissolved provisions into sludge, and summer's unyielding sun drained the vigor from weary soldiers encased in their metallic shells. The Battle of Crécy exemplified weather's capriciousness, where an untimely storm softened the ground, disrupting the French cavalry and enabling English archers to hold sway. Weather's capriciousness. Nature's whim could undo even the most meticulously calculated plans, teaching commanders to become astute weather watchers, ever ready for shifts beyond their control. The marshlands exercised their own deceptive charm, tricking armies into losing not battles but footing, a spectral part of some battles such as Bannockburn, where the Scots exploited bogs to topple their better-equipped adversaries. These waterlogged expanses were not conquered with brute force, but with a delicate dance of prediction and patience. Marshes, like supernatural pit traps, tested the acumen of those who dared step into their soft grasp, turning earthly terrain into a complex game of darting tactics and waiting. Winter's toll. Lastly, as kingdoms rose and fell, winters too demanded their tribute. Wars waged under an iron canopy of frost. Here, soldiers battled not just enemies, but the bitter cold, nipping at exposed skin, hunger gnawing at morale. Consider the Livonian Wars, where Baltic freezes bogged down operations, freezing ambitions in their icy grip. Those who fought past the ethereal barrier of snow realized that wars of iron were also wars of will, where survival hinged more on inner fire than mere warmth. The tales of these battles have receded with time, yet nature's quiet reclamation forms the truest testament to human endeavors, nature's enduring legacy. As forests re-emerge and rivers carve new paths, we are reminded that even the marks of the fiercest conflicts eventually yield to the timeless rhythm of the earth. Nature, the eternal participant, ensures that histories may fade, but the lessons linger, a testament to terrain's relentless and impartial command. In the hushed candlelight of our modern imaginations, medieval battles stir a symphony of gallant trumpets and rolling drums. Yet the reality was nothing of the sort. A medieval battlefield was a cacophony devoid of harmony. It was a chaotic blend of guttural screams, orders lost in dialects that blended into one unintelligible blur, and the relentless clash of steel upon steel. The cacophony of battle. Horses neighed sharply, driven forward into the fray, while the chilling whistle of arrows pierced the air, a deathly chorus that hinted at peril. Within this unscripted mayhem, seasoned warriors recognized a thin barrier between survival and doom. Amid such disorder, legends of heroism emerged, fueled often by chaos itself. Actions magnified by the bedlam, woven into tales of survival and courage. Fear, that ever-constant battlefield companion, lurked in the hearts of even the bravest knights. Despite glorified film portrayals that paint warriors as immune to terror, real soldiers felt it deeply. Fear lived in the pit of their stomachs, an insistent reminder of mortality as each strike could be their last. Fear and endurance. Yet fear, too, would spur men into extraordinary feats of endurance, allowing them to tap into reserves they didn't know they possessed. Fatigue, an enemy as relentless as any foe, compounded their struggles. Burdened by heavy armor, cumbersome weapons, and the sheer physical toll of battle, they charged, weakened already by exhausting marches and scant food. In these extremes, men transformed, their heroism born more of desperation than glory. Injuries on a medieval battleground stripped the encounter of glamour, leaving only gruesomeness behind. The elegant, choreographed fights seen in movies were nothing compared to the brutal truth. Gruesome injuries. Weapons were designed for efficiency, to cleave, crush, and pierce with horrific intent. A single blow shattered bones and severed limbs, leaving not cinematic duels, but unvarnished violence. Watching comrades fall to such fates added a haunting burden, every soldier painfully aware of their own precarious existence. Post-battle scenes told stories of grim determination, with medics facing injuries unimaginable in scope and scale, often leading to deadly infections in unclean conditions. Here lay another battlefield, one of endurance and suffering, rhythmically pulsing alongside combat's chaos. The unavoidable stink of war. Where films might ignore, the stink of medieval warfare was unavoidable. The acrid scent of sweat, blood, and fear mingled crudely with earthy smells, permeating the air. Later, it would mingle with the metallic tint of gunpowder, creating an olfactory assault that underscored combat as a grim reality rather than romantic adventure. Every breath was a vivid reminder of human mortality. In this all-too-real atmosphere, survival depended as much on mental resilience as physical ability. With senses overloaded by war's harsh realities, sights and sounds forever etched into the minds of those who survived. Intimate struggles. Battles were fought in intimate spaces, reducing grand strategies to personal struggles. Amid swirling chaos, soldiers found themselves in life-or-death duels, their world shrinking down to the narrow focus of immediate survival. With fortitude tested and opportunism reigning, a single wrong move could spell doom or captivity. Gut-wrenching encounters left men confronting not only their foes, but their inner selves, each duel a testament to sheer human will against insurmountable odds. The human fabric of medieval conflict, often overlooked by grand Hollywood narratives, is that battles positioned brother against brother, neighbor against familiar neighbor, brother against brother. Society then was a tightly woven tapestry, soldiers confronting people they knew, an irony and tragedy overshadowed by simplistic good versus evil storytelling. Familial and social ties played out brutally on the field, loyalty to friends sometimes clashing with duty to one's king. Identifying friend and foe added layers of turmoil, forcing tough decisions amid chaos, making each clash a painful reminder of intricate social fabrics torn by war. Pragmatism often ruled these violent encounters, revealing battlefields as a strange blend of chaos and opportunity. The transactional aspect of war. Post-battle scenes of scavenging unfolded, with survivors stripping the fallen of valuables. Armor, weapons, and finery were retrieved to be reused, bartered, or sold, a grim reminder of war's transactional aspect. Victors found monetary rewards amid the tragedy, with ransoms for noble prisoners and spoils adding incentive. Here, medieval battles shifted from epic narratives to realms where life and death mingled with commerce's harsher realities. Away from the combat, non-combatants suffered under battle's shadow. Fields became barren, families displaced into refugees on their own lands. Collateral damage. Armies marched left pestilence and destitution, scorched earth tactics, further impoverishing local farmers. Such collateral damage often endured longer than any battle, with villages enduring raids and sieges. Acknowledging their plight broadens the understanding of medieval warfare beyond regiments, revealing impacts that carve scars into the cultural and physical landscape. Contrary to cinematic depictions, battlefields were rarely epic landscapes. Strategic handles dictated sites. Whether marshy quagmires or wooded barriers, terrain played a decisive role, friendly to neither fiction nor aesthetic. Geography's influence. The land conspired with weather, handing victory to some, defeat to others. Countless battles hinged on commanders leveraging these natural elements, a dance of geography rather than dramatic conflict. The stories and victories etched into medieval battlegrounds echoed far beyond immediate loss or triumph. Fields stained with blood and stretch marks by conflict became unspoken memorials. Survivors carried tales home, stories of commitments forged in adversity, passed on to new generations. Relics found in familiar soil, bones, and blades remain reminders of this fractured past. A richer portrait. Understanding battle's legacy allows us a richer portrait, where scars woven through time ripple into our modern age. As we explore these gritty motifs, we gain a sense of humanity's resilience and folly. If you found this dive into the true specters of medieval warfare fascinating, do consider subscribing to our channel. There's so much more to uncover together. We welcome your thoughts and likes. Every engagement helps us continue spinning these tales, unraveling history's enigmatic threads.